Hi everyone, welcome back. So this is the second video. The idea here is to get a little bit of coding practice. And don't forget, if you really want to learn how to program, it's very important that you program along with me. So let's try some of the examples from the lectures, and then we'll expand on that a little bit. So first of all, the first program that we dealt with was for x in A, B, C, D, E. Now, this colon at the end here, just like in the if statement, it usually indicates that the next line is going to be an indented block. Because this is a for loop, it has a body, and the body is normally indented. And most of the time, the editor that you're using, in this case VS Code, is smart enough to know that you need to indent the next line, so it automatically indents that next line for you. Alright, so we're going to have a print statement. Again, I'm going to use an F string here. Let's use that new syntax where we use x equals. And by the way, it doesn't have to be called x. X is just a convenient one. For example, if I want to do something like for letter in A, B, C, D, E, that would work as well. So let's try this program out real quick. I'm just going to run it right directly in the editor here. So you can see it prints out letter equals and then the value. And because letter is a string variable, it puts single quotes around that. If you don't like the equal sign and the variable name being right next to each other, you can also do something like this if you want to. And I'll show you what that looks like. It'll put a space in there. It doesn't make much of a difference. This type of print statement is normally used for debugging purposes, but you can do it if it makes you feel a bit more comfortable. So let's use a for loop, this same basic for loop. Let's use it in order to reverse this string. I want to create a string that is actually reversed. So first, when we print these letters, you'll notice that the print statement prints the letters in order. We go A, then B, then C, then D, then E. So if I do something like for letter in A, B, C, D, E, one thing I could do, for example, I could say result equals an empty string. And then inside the for loop, I can say result plus equals. If you remember the plus equals operator, it adds something to an existing variable. So this is going to add something to result. So what I could do is I could add letter to that. Now this is adding two strings together, which sounds a little bit strange, but actually does make sense in programming. Adding a string to another string is just concatenating or joining those strings. All right, so this is the equivalent to result equals result plus letter. And result plus letter is just going to take these two, put the result on the left-hand side and letter on the right-hand side, and merge them together into a single string. Okay, there's a shortcut for that, which is result plus equals letter. Let's take a look to see what that looks like. Okay, so just run this now. So you can see result is actually in the same order, which makes perfect sense because we started with an empty string, and on the very first iteration when letter was equal to A, we added it. And you can see that letter here, the equivalent here, is adding letter to the right-hand side. So if I add A to an empty string on the right-hand side of an empty string, the result is now equal to just A. On the next iteration, letter is equal to B, so I will take result, which is equal to A, and I will add B to the right-hand side. And then on the next iteration, I add C to the right-hand side of AB, and then I add D to the right-hand side of ABC, and then finally I add E to the right-hand side of ABCD. So this is not reversing the string. But let's write the same code. I'm just going to duplicate this code here, and I'm going to rename this reverse. I'll just change the name here and here. And I'm going to go back to this original notation here for adding because there is no shortcut way of doing this. I'm just going to move letter to the opposite side. All right, now when I print this, this is going to reverse the string. Oops, I messed that up. This is supposed to be reverse. This is why I'm going to have a lecture on debugging a little bit later. Oops, I realize now that I didn't copy the right thing. There we go. All right, there we go. So you can see that the string has been reversed. And the reason for that is, on the first iteration, letter is equal to A, and reverse is empty. So by adding the A and the empty string together, I get just the string A. So now reverse is equal to A, just like it was with the previous loop. But then when I get to B, I add B to reverse, not reverse and B. So the B actually gets added to the left-hand side. So the result of this concatenation here is BA. And then when letter is equal to C, I add C to the left-hand side of BA, so it becomes CBA. And then when letter is equal to D, I add the D to the left-hand side of CBA, so that becomes DCBA. And then finally on the last iteration, letter is equal to E, I add that E to the left-hand side of DCBA, giving us EDCBA. All right, so there's a couple of variations on that. So one of the things I mentioned in the animation video was the use of the range function. So let's experiment a little bit with how range works today. So I'm going to do something like for num in range. So the one we used in the video was range 5. And I mentioned that this is equivalent to writing 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so let's have a print statement that's going to say something like, let's just print out num actually. Okay, I'll try to use different variables for each one, so that way down here in the output we can tell which one, which output goes with which loop. So in this case we can see that num is equal to 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. It executes this print statement 5 times. Which is one of the reasons why range is so helpful. Sometimes we don't actually need to know the values 0 through 4. We just need to know that there are 5 of them, because I want to repeat something 5 times. So if I want to repeat something 5 times, this is a notation that you should remember. Range 5. But actually range is a bit more of a complicated function than we're using right here. It's a function that we can call with up to 3 arguments. So the arguments that we can specify for range are the start index, the end index, and the step. So another way that we could use this function would be range 2, 5. And you can actually see in the pop-up here that there is a start index and a stop index and a step. And we're not using the step here because I've only supplied 2 of the 3 arguments. So that means that I've supplied the start and the stop. Okay, so I'm starting at index 2, and I'm going to stop at index 5. Now here's a little quirk about Python, specifically the range function, but it also appears elsewhere. In Python, when you say range 2, 5, it includes the value 2, but it doesn't include the value 5. Okay, so if you remember when we did range 5, that was equivalent to the values 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Not 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? So in this case, this is going to go from index 2 inclusive to index 5 exclusive. So let's see how this works when we run it. In this case, you can see that num is equal to 2, 3, and 4, up to, but not including, 5. Okay? Let's now go from 2 to 10. Just for the sake of it, that's nothing too special. We shouldn't be surprised to see that this is going to print out num equals 2 all the way up to and including num equals 9, not including num equals 10 for the reasons we just talked about. But we can also use a step. So for example, I can go up by step size 3. So this is going to go 2, 5, 8, and then it's going to try 11, but 11 is larger than the end index, so it won't include 11. There we go. So it includes 2, 5, and 8. So this is actually really helpful if you want to go every other character, for example. That's one thing that you could do is you could, for example, go through a string and get every other character by going from the beginning of the string to the end of the string, step size 2, for instance. that would be possible. All right, so now let's do some while loops. So if you remember, in the while loop we had to have a library, and if you're not sure what a library is, it's just some code that was created by somebody else. Could be created by the creators of Python, or it could be created by other programmers like yourself. In this case, the random library was created by the developers of Python. It's called random, and all I'm saying is from the random library, I want to import one thing, a function called randrange. And you could put a comma and import other functions from that library if you wanted to. There are other ways to import things that we'll encounter over our programming exercises, but for right now, I'm importing just this one function. Okay, so let's go down here and we'll do while loops. I'm going to put comments here. Just as a general practice, it's a good idea to put comments in all of your code. So this is a loop over a string. And this one is loop over a string, creating a new string. And this is another one as loop over a string, creating a reverse string. And this one is using the range function. And what I might do here is use some comments to describe the arguments for range. Okay. So for while loops then, what we were doing was some simulation of a simple Pokemon battle. So we had initialization of our HP. We set it to 60. It doesn't really matter what we set it to here. And we also had opponent HP. Let's set them both to 60 and see what happens. So our while loop just looks like this. Keyword while and then some condition. What you'll often see, and I didn't mention this when we did conditionals, what you'll often see in some programming languages is they'll often require that the while loop kind of look like this with round brackets, and then you put the conditional inside the round brackets. Now, it's not wrong to do this in Python, it's just not necessary. However, if you feel that it makes your program more readable to put round brackets around your condition, you feel free to do so. And I'll come back to this point in just a minute. So the condition that we used was that our HP has to be greater than 0, and the opponent HP also has to be greater than 0. We're certainly not going to continue the battle once one of the two Pokemon has fainted. Now this AND is actually joining the result of this expression here and the result of this expression here. Both of those expressions are Boolean expressions. That just means that they have a value of either true or false. And so if it's not super clear that this AND is applying to this whole thing here, then what you can do is you can put brackets around it. If that helps and makes it easier for you to read this program, feel free to put those in. That's true for if statements as well. Okay, so I think I'll leave these in for clarity. You can put brackets around the whole thing if you wanted to as well. I don't think that that adds to the readability of this program. All right, so in this particular battle, we get to go first. So what we're going to do is decrease the opponent's HP. So we're going to use minus equals. Now what minus equals does, just like we were talking about before when we did plus equals and when we were in this code right here, it's going to add something to this result variable. Minus equals is going to subtract something from it. So minus equals is going to say set the value of opponent HP equal to the old value of opponent HP minus this new value. And the new value that we're going to use is this randrange function. Okay, so we can put any range in here. This is a lower limit and an upper limit for our random value. So the next thing we're going to do is if the opponent's Pokemon is still conscious, then they are going to do some damage to us. And it's the same range. We both have the same kind of ability. We have an indefinite advantage because we get to go first, especially if we're doing roughly the same damage. I think more often than not, we're going to win the battle. But for demonstration purposes, it works just fine. Let's be lazy and just copy and paste here. Let me show you actually a trick for this. So let's say, for example, I didn't want to use these the spaces around the equal sign here. And I had a lot of lines. I only have 2 lines of code here. But let's say I had a lot of lines. What you can do in it, and this is specific to Visual Studio Code, is you can hold down the Alt key and position a second cursor in the second line of code. And you can hold down the Alt key and click in different spots. So I hold down the Alt key and left click with the left mouse button, and now I have 2 cursors. So actually, if I hit backspace here, it's going to erase both equal signs, and then I can actually cursor back and forth. So I can even go into position and erase the other space before and after the equal sign. Now I don't want to continue having these multiple cursors, because you can see having 2 cursors is kind of confusing, and of course it's going to start typing multiple lines of code. So let me go back so that I have 2 cursors here. So if you want to get out of this mode, you can either go down to the bottom of the program where there's no room for the extra cursor, or you can hit the escape button, and that'll go back to just your original cursor, the first one that you had. So that's a little tip that you can use. Another way that you can do the same thing, so say for example I want to put some spaces just before the variable here, but I also want to do that on the other print. What I can do is I can hit Control Alt, hold those 2 keys, and press down on the cursor, and that'll create another cursor just below the current one. This is especially helpful if the position that you want the cursor to be in is in exactly the same column on that line. So now I have 2 cursors just like before, so I can put in a couple of spaces, for instance, hit escape to get out of that mode, and save it. That's an easy way that you can make changes. If you have a lot of code that's quite similar and you want to make a lot of changes, that multiple cursor thing can save you some time. So this is going to do a really, really simple battle, and after this is done, you can see that the opponent has lost because they have a negative HP and ours still has a positive HP. Let's run the program again, because I would expect different results every time I run this, different numbers anyway. So you can see that our Pokemon won again. Pokemon HP is negative. This is going to happen most of the time since we get to strike first. Okay, let's see. There we go. Again. Let's see if we can actually lose. It's pretty unlikely because I chose a really big range. So 20 to 35 is a lot compared to our HP. So we're doing roughly half the damage every time. So there's not really that. It's not really that likely. It actually is significant that we go first because we basically get an extra move before our opponent gets to go, and that is very significant since it's almost half the total HP. All right. So just in summary, I just want to remind you that the key difference and the reason why we have 2 different for loops in Python is because the for loop is useful in situations where I know exactly how many times I want to repeat. So for example, up at the beginning, I wanted to repeat once for every character in this string. So it was a prescribed number of iterations. And that was true in here as well. A while loop is used when you don't know how many iterations it's going to take. And I'll do some examples a little bit later on that are a bit more advanced that'll show you exactly how this works. An example will be writing a program that's going to find, say, an approximation for the square root, or something that's approximating some math expression of some sort. And what we might do is we might keep making the result, the approximation, more and more accurate with each iteration, and we'll stop when we get close enough. Might say, if we feel that the value is close enough, then we can quit, but I don't know how many iterations it's going to take before we get close enough. So a while loop is really useful if you don't know how many iterations it's going to take to do something. Now finally, one last thing I want to talk about with while loops is that you have to be very careful with a while loop. It's possible to create a while loop that never exits. So here we have 2 major components to our while loop. We have the condition, This is the continue condition. If the continue condition is true, we execute the body of the loop. If the continue condition is always true, then we're going to infinitely execute the body of the loop. So the body of the loop here, that's the other part of the while loop, it needs to modify the variables that are used in the condition so that eventually they're not true anymore. But I don't want you to worry too much about what an infinite loop is like. I actually want to show you what one looks like. So let's do that. So for example, imagine I would have something like this. And I were to do something like this, let's say, well, I is, y I is greater than 10. I want to do something like iteration I, and then what I might do here is increase I. So in this case, increasing I is going to make it go bigger, and that's going to still be true here. I will still be less than 10, but I'm getting closer to 10. And if I keep doing that on every single iteration, this loop will eventually exit. But the problem is, sometimes people make a mistake. They make little mistakes like this. So here in this case, I'm decreasing the value of I, and therefore it's going farther and farther away from 10. So this code will never exit. So let's watch what happens in the in Visual Studio Code here when we do this. So you can see it eventually goes into the negatives, obviously, and computers work fast, so this is going quite fast. In fact, it would go a lot faster than this if we weren't printing to the console. Printing actually is a very expensive operation. So if this happens to you, you can just do what I just did, which is click down here in the terminal area and hit Control-C, and that will break out. It's called a keyboard interrupt, and that's going to stop the program. Okay, so you got to be quite careful about that. So let's fix this program. I'm going to leave the error in comments so that we can remember that this was wrong. What I'll do is I'll put another comment beside it and say this is an error. So in a future video, I'm going to post, actually it's probably the next video, I'm going to post what are the different types of errors that you can encounter in Python, and what are some techniques that you can use to resolve those errors. So we're going to obviously build upon this in the next video. But for now, I think this is a good start. So thanks, everybody. See you next time.